Babolian. I am in 7th grade. I go to the Ada Bar West High School. I'm a part of the Hegney Hustlers 4-H Club. I am a 5th generation beekeeper, and today I'm going to be talking to you about what the average person can do to help the honeybees. There are 3 things the average person could do to help the honeybees. The first thing is food. Nectar. They turn into honey and store for later. And then pollen, they collect and eat right away. And then syrup, we feed the bees when the flowers aren't blooming. We usually use sugar water or corn syrup. The second thing is water. The most common call we get about it is that bees in the stock tank, the dog bowl, or even the swimming pool. So for the stock tank, you just put boards or large sticks in it, so then the bees can have a safe place to land and get out if they get stuck in the water. Then the dog bowl and swimming pool is the same solution. You just find the direction that the bees are coming from and put a closer water source to their hive. The third thing is the general environment. So you could provide a food source for the bees by planting flowers, giving them water, and also just don't mow just to mow, because it has a large amount of the bees' food in it. So it's okay to hay the road ditches and to take care of invasive plants, but don't mow just to mow. And then spraying, it affects the bees a lot. So if you have to spray at dawn or dusk, because that's when the bees aren't flying, and it will have less chance to affect the bees. So in conclusion, there are 3 things the average person can do to help the honeybees. The first thing is food, so just plant flowers basically. The second thing is water. You provide water source for them. And then the general environment, basically just these things here. Thank you for coming. Any questions?
Any questions for Danny?
Yes?
Missy.
What are some kinds of flowers that you see around Ada that the bees like to go to?
They'll just go to any kind of flowers. Any other questions?
How many hives do you and your family have?
I don't know.
Between 3 and 5,000.
Between 3 and 5,000.
Wow.
3 and 5,000.
Repeat it.
Between 3 and 5,000.
What breed of honeybees do you guys have?
I don't know.
No specific breed.
Any other questions?
All right. Thank you, Danny. Thank you for his presentation and also the FFA presentation. We appreciate you guys coming out and taking a little time out of school for that. All right. We'll move on. Go ahead and move your table up. Good job, buddy. We're going to keep moving on. We're going to start in with our other presentations for the day. Our first speaker will be Melissa Carlson. She is the VP of Research for the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council. She's going to review the 2022 on-farm research trials and preview the 2023 trials. So please welcome Melissa.
You just hold it. Then you don't have to wear it.
Yeah.
But if you want to put that in your pocket or something.
All right. I grew up in 4-H and I did FFA in high school too, so I've always got a soft spot in my heart for these presentations. So good morning, you guys. Thank you for coming out today. I'm Melissa Carlson, and I work with I coordinate the on-farm research network for the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council. And so the council is where your wheat checkoff dollars are going. And so today I just wanted to mention, I think most of you should have grabbed kind of this booklet that has lots of booklets in it. So most of our presentations, at least from this morning and some from the afternoon, all of the slides are going to be in here. So if you're in the back or if the print on the screen is really tiny, you guys can follow along in the books too. And then I also just wanted to mention one other thing. So every year we print our on-farm research results in our annual report, and so you also have this stuck into your booklet. So all of the information and the data that I have on the slides today are also in this booklet too, plus some of the extra trials that I won't be going over today. So usually our kind of big information dump, I guess, where we go over all the results is at our annual summit, which is during the Prairie Grains Conference, and that was in December. So hopefully some of you guys were able to make it there. But if not, otherwise definitely plan on coming to next year's Prairie Grains Conference in Grand Forks. So just to get started, if you guys haven't heard of the On-Farm Research Network before, or if you need a refresher, so we are funded by the Wheat Checkoff. So that's where we get the majority of our funding. But we also work in partnership with AFREC, which is the Fertilizer Research and Education Council. That's your fertilizer checkoff. They've helped fund some grants to help us work on some fertilizer trials. And then we also partner with the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council. And David Key is here with them today, and he's going to talk to you guys later. They funded some research grants for us to help us work on soybeans and include soybeans in our on-farm projects too. So we've been working on fertilizer and cover crop trials that involve soybeans with them. So definitely appreciative of that. So how we do our on-farm research trials, so these are these are scaling up the small plot trials. So you guys know the university kind of does their small plot research. They have a lot of different treatments and kind of their small, like 5x10 or 5x20 small plots. So we kind of take some of those treatments, some stuff that they've been finding is working in their trials, and we scale it up into on-farm trials that you guys can try with your equipment in your field. So typically we're looking at 2, maybe 3 treatments total. And so usually each plot is about the width of, they're going to be the width of whatever we're using to apply, whether it's your seeder, the spreader, or the sprayer. And so it's usually one round of whatever's applying, and so we usually try to have 4 replications of each treatment. So we get about 8 plots that are randomized over the field. And so usually it ends up being somewhere total between 20 and 40 acres, just depends on the size of the field and the treatments that we're doing. And so what we try to do is we take each of these protocols and we ask you guys to try them out. And then we replicate that in multiple locations each year. So that way we're not just testing it on your farm in one year. We test it on multiple sites. So that way we can combine everybody's data to get stronger statistical response. So that way we have more to go off and we can be more confident in our conclusions. And so we also multiply that or replicate that over multiple years also. We try to do each trial for at least 3 years, so that way we can get different growing seasons, different climate patterns that we have each year, so we can get the response to the treatments in each of those different weather years also. So in 2022, we started a handful of new trials. We started looking at foliar copper on mineral soils. So for the folks kind of out east and north that are farming peat soils. It's pretty commonplace to apply copper in the peat soils, but some central consultants that we've been working with had been noticing copper deficiencies starting to show up in wheat on the mineral soils. So we decided to give it a go. So I'll be touching on that one here in a little bit. We also looked at polyhalite compared to AMS. So polyhalite is it's not commercially available yet, but we're working with a company based out of the UK that is hoping to make it available to you guys in the next couple of years. And so we're trying to collect some data on how it responds, how we use it, how it can fit into what you guys are currently doing. And then one that I was really excited to start this year was looking at nitrogen rates on high yielding wheat varieties. And so this one, we'll talk about this one too, is an application and yield map based trial. So it's a little bit different from what we've done in the past. This was our final year of the rotational elevated P&K fertility trial. We did 4 years of adding extra P&K to a wheat and soybean rotation and followed it each year through the rotation. So I'll cover that one a little bit. This year we started kind of partnering with the U of M to expand our covered rye cover crop trials. So in the past I've talked about trials where we've just compared rye to no rye and then green seeding soybeans into that rye. So this year, over the last year and a half, 2 years, we stepped that up and started looking at different rye termination timings and which one works best for green seeding those soybeans in the spring so we don't hurt our yield with the soybeans. We also kind of started a one-off trial with rock rolling wheat also this year, which I didn't realize was a thing that people were doing. So when we found out, we decided to test it out just to see if there was any yield response or not. And then we've been continuing on with our on-combine protein mapping also. So I'm just going to touch on the first 4 trials that I had in that list there. So I mentioned the foliar copper. So we just wanted to, the objective for this one was just to assess, can we get a yield response by applying copper on those soils that are low testing in copper. So kind of the AgVise recommendations and from the literature is if your copper is below 0.4 parts per million, you're probably likely to see a copper response. And that tends to be more on the sandy, if you got sandy fields or if you got sandy knobs, it's a good chance that those fields or those parts of the field are low in copper. And so the product that we had graciously donated to us was Elemax. And so that's a copper chelate, and we applied that at 20 gallons per acre alone in the tank at tillering. But that product, you can tank mix it if you were to apply it just regularly on your own. And so the spring was pretty hectic. We originally had 8 locations lined up and ready to go for this, and then with the mess that we had and people rotating fields out of wheat and prevent plant, we ended up with, we lost one site to barnyard grass completely. So we ended up with 2 sites that we were able to harvest this year. So one way up in Roosevelt and then one pretty close to here over in Beltrami. And so these were about 3% organic matter fields, a little bit on the medium sandy fields. The Roosevelt site did not actually get a lot of rain. So they got about 5.5 inches of rain. Our rain that we collect is based on field view. So that's just kind of estimated rain. We don't have rain gauges out in every single one of our fields, but at least it gives us an idea of what the rainfall was for each of our trial fields. So Roosevelt only got about 5.5 inches, and then Beltrami had 11.5. And I think that definitely affected the yield results that we had this year. So in Beltrami, they had a pretty good year. So kind of field average was right around 85, 90 bushels in wheat this year. And we did see about almost 4 bushel yield increase with that copper application. So that was encouraging to see. And then in Roosevelt, it was about a 65 bushel field average, but with no difference between treatment or control. So my guess is that maybe the rain, if rain was limiting there, then the copper isn't really going to matter. But since we only have, and then when you combine the 2 locations, it's not significant, but then again, we only had 2 locations this year. So I think we'll definitely be continuing this next year. And and the year after, I would imagine. So I think once we are able to get another handful more sites, we'll be able to have a little bit more better idea to give you guys an idea of if this is when or if it's going to respond to a copper application. The next trial that we started this year was looking at polyhalite and comparing that to ammonium sulfate. So polyhalite, it's a potassium sulfur mineral. It's mined in the UK. And it's about 14% potassium, 19% sulfur, and then it has a little bit of magnesium and calcium in it as well. And so it's just mined as a straight mineral, so it also actually technically or qualifies as an organic fertilizer also. And it comes out, or they send it as pearls, so it's kind of about the same size as urea pearls, so it's just a granular that you would mix in with the rest of your fertilizers. And so we were working with the company, and we just wanted to determine if this is a viable source of sulfur as an alternative to AMS, or a potential alternative to AMS, if it has any positive, neutral, or negative impacts on yield. I know in Iowa, they've tested it as a potassium source on corn. And I can't recall off the top of my head the results that they got there. I don't think they saw much for differences either, but we decided to look at it as a sulfur source. And so basically our treatments were just balancing, using the growers' fertilizer rates and balancing all the nutrients between the two treatments, so that we're just using the sulfur source, whether it's from polyhalite or AMS, as our treatment. And we had 4 sites of this year, 1 in Mentor, 2 near Red Lake Falls, and then 1 up in Stephen. And we really didn't see much for differences, statistical differences, among any of these locations. So I don't think that's a bad thing. So if we're not going to have any yield response, it's better than a bad yield response. So that's kind of what we have for this year. Nothing too exciting, at least. But we'll be continuing this one on next year as well to get another season, get some different weather responses in there too, to see what happens there. Oh, and then protein. Oh, I just wanted to highlight the protein. We did have a statistical response to protein at one site, 0.3 of the protein decrease with the polyhalite. I would call that a statistical response, but I would not call that an agronomic response. So as of yet, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't put much stock into that there. We did do some soil testing afterwards, and I just wanted to highlight we did complete soil analyses, just highlighting the sulfur, residual sulfur that we had here. We ended up with some really wacky numbers in the 6 to 24 sulfur, upwards of 200, 300 pounds of residual sulfur. But I guess for that, I would say Dave Franzen always says that the sulfur test is crap. So I guess I don't really put much stock, or I can't really tell you one way or another if that's a true response or not. And so yeah, I think that one kind of covers that one. Our elevated P and K fertility trial. So kind of moving on to this next one. This year, this was the 4th and final year of this trial. So what we did, the objective was to determine if phosphorus and potassium, if we're in high yielding environments, if we're being a little bit limited, if we're not fertilizing enough there. And also to kind of see if maybe a lot of growers apply, or I shouldn't say, some growers apply their P and K, 2 years worth of P and K in 1 year. And so we wanted to see in their wheat and soybean rotations. And so we wanted to see if maybe either the wheat or the soybeans was maybe taking up more than it should be, or if that we think it is. So that was another thing we wanted to check out with this trial. And so we did this one in conjunction with U of M. So Dave Grafstrom up at the Magnuson Research Station in Roseau, he was kind of the brainchild behind this trial. And so he actually had some small plots where he had the full array of P and K fertility treatments in those small plots. So we had 6 different treatments of 6 rates of P, 6 rates of K, and then 6 rates of P and K in combination to look at each of those individual responses. And then on the large plots, obviously we can't have 18 or 20 different treatments out in the field. So we just had the main 2 treatments, the control, the farmer's practice, versus the elevated P and K rate, so an extra 50 units of P and K each in the treated strips each year, added each year to the same strips over 4 years through a wheat and soybean rotation. So really building those P and K levels up. And I would like to tell you we have the full analysis done, but we don't. I'm still waiting for some data to come in yet too. So hopefully through this spring and summer, we'll get through kind of the full gamut of yield response over the 4 years. We've been tissue testing, so where the tissue levels were going with the soil, how the soil test levels changed over the years. And we definitely should have that for you guys later on, but unfortunately I just don't have it for you right now. Some things that Dave had mentioned that he saw in the small plots this year, they got some timely rainfall, so they had some decent yielding conditions this year. He didn't see any difference, or at least no statistical differences in wheat and soybean yields this year between the treatments and the control plot. Oh, I didn't include that. I forgot to put that photo in. But one thing he did mention was that in the zero control plot, where there's been no fertilizer added for the last 4 years, he definitely had some potassium deficiencies showing up in the soybeans this year. He was able to see some of that, especially as it got drier towards the end of the season. And interesting thing that he noted was that the aphids were actually targeting those sick plants versus the other plant, the high fertility treatments. Those were green and bushy and good looking, but the aphids are actually shooting for the sick plants over the green plants. So that was an interesting thing that he observed. As for the large plots, so this year, originally we had 5 sites, 5 large plot sites for this trial. With the spring that we had, we lost 3 of those sites this year. They just had 2 of them had to rotate out. They couldn't get their soybeans in. And then one of the sites just had to do PP this year, so that was a bummer. But we did have 2 sites at Badette and Elbow Lake. And in Badette, he was at soybeans this year. No difference in the soybean yield. It was about 35 bushel field average, so it wasn't one of his greater years either. So I think, I don't think P and K were his yield limiting factors this year, so we didn't see any differences there. In Elbow Lake, he was in the wheat part of his rotation this year, and so the field was running about 85, 90 bushels, so he ended up with a really good year, high yielding conditions, and we did end up with almost a 4 bushel yield increase with that elevated P and K. So we did see that the extra fertility helped in the high yielding conditions, but I did just want to run the numbers to see if that actually pays out in the end. So just some quick calculations at 560 per ton potash, 800 per ton MAP. The total cost for 50 units of the extra P and K was about $55 an acre. And I just calculate even if you were just at $6 wheat, it would take a yield increase of 9 bushels to pay for that, and 4 bushels in soybeans at $12 beans. So even though we did get a yield increase, it didn't pay for the extra fertilizer. So that's something to be taken into consideration. So we were chasing after the high yields, but in the end, it didn't really pan out. Question?
What were the P and K levels in the soil test?
I can't recall it off the top of my head. That's something I should have on here. Maybe I'll stick that in for the other routes on the SGU. I'm sorry, I really can't call it off the top of my head. But yeah, we will have a full summary for that. If not later on this spring or summer, at least next year, you guys will have it. We'll do the full gamut of what actually happened with this trial. But to quickly move on to our next trial that we tried this year. So we looked at nitrogen rates on high yielding wheat varieties. And our goal with this one is to look at yield, protein, and profitability response of really try and maybe pushing those nitrogen rates and what that does with our kind of some of our racehorse varieties and how that compares, how some of maybe the high yielding, low protein varieties respond and profit compared to maybe some of the lower yielding, better quality varieties. And so we applied nitrogen. We had 6 different nitrogen rates for this trial. So 0, 60, 90, 120, 150, and 180 units of extra nitrogen, or of nitrogen applied total. And we had 2 sites for this year that we tried it on, and both fields are planted to 95-90 this year. And so we took those 6 rates, and we had 3 replications. We had a total of about 18 1-acre plots that I stuck into blocks and wrote it into a prescription map, so that way the spreader was just able to apply the whole trial. So it didn't involve much work on the farmer's end for getting the trial put in. And then we used the yield map just to collect the data. So the farmer just combined his field normally. He didn't have to do anything special. And then I just extracted the yield points out of the plots for the yield data for these. We did calibrate, made sure to calibrate the yield monitors first beforehand. To collect the protein data, since it would be a nightmare to try and go and stop and probe or collect protein from the combine for each of those 18 plots, we actually went about a week before harvest and hand harvested samples. So basically we just took a hand scythe, hand cutter, and walked in a line through each of the plots, just hand cut it, grabbing hand samples. And then we used some of the university's small plot data to thresh those out to get the protein data. And so we had 2 sites at East Grand Forks and Red Lake Falls. East Grand Forks had the field information would be in your books that you guys have. East Grand Forks had a little bit less rain than Red Lake Falls did. So I just, up on the tables that I have here, and then in your books on page 15, I have the yield response for East Grand Forks was a little bit different than what I would have expected. So it kind of ranged from about 57 bushels in the control up to 73 bushels with the 180 units of nitrogen. Protein response, instead of actually, generally we theorize, you would imagine that as we increase nitrogen, we're going to increase yield and increase protein. With this site, the protein actually climbed and it dipped down and it started going down again before it shot up. So I'm not sure why that was, but it was pretty consistent across all the reps. So I'm not sure what went on with that one. So I'd be interested to see if that happens in other sites again. But with this one, there actually was a statistical response with the partial profit. So just to kind of put some numbers to it, I calculated a kind of partial profit with this at $8 a bushel for the wheat, protein, and included the protein premiums and discounts with the protein for each plot at 5 cents a fifth, and then just with a urea cost of $800 a ton. The 60 units of nitrogen rate actually was the most profitable compared to some of the higher nitrogen rates. And actually the least profitable application was 150 units of nitrogen at this site. So I know this one got a little bit less rain, so if rain became the limiting factor there, that could be why the lower nitrogen rate was more profitable here. At Red Lake Falls, it was a different story. It was pretty more typical, what we would expect. So 0 units of nitrogen actually yielded 70 bushels, and the highest, we went from 70 to about 87 bushels, so it was about a 17 bushel spread among the different nitrogen treatments. So about 87 bushels on that 180 unit treatment. And so significant differences between the 0 and the highest treatments, with yield increasing and protein increasing as you added nitrogen, as we would expect. But no statistical differences in profit with with this site, the profit increasing their nitrogen rates. But it kind of trended sort of that you would have more higher profit with the higher application rate. So 2 sites, 2 different responses, same variety. I'm looking forward to doing this, replicating this on more sites in the coming years. Just talking with Dan Kaiser, he's the fertility specialist down at the U of M. I know he's interested in gaining more of this data to at least check his wheat nitrogen recommendations to make sure that they're on track, to see if he needs to do any tweaking or not. I would like to have more varieties. I'd like to see this kind of trial on like trigger to really see if we can push the yield and then see what the protein's response is also as we're increasing the nitrogen, and then also compare it to maybe some fields of like Linkert or Torgy. So maybe fields that aren't quite yielding as high as like 95-90 or trigger, but they have higher quality. So what the yield, protein, and the profit response is there. If there's maybe to compare, I guess, the two different kind of schools of thought of either pouring the coals to it and trying to put all the nitrogen and inputs that you can on it, what the profit is for that compared to maybe having kind of just the standard, maybe lower input variety that does well with fewer inputs, and what the profitability is going that route also. And here I did mention that we talked about our planting green trial, a cover crop trial that we did with the U of M, working with Angie Peltier and Jody Young-Hughes. So this one, we looked at 3 different termination timings of rye with our green seeding the soybeans into the cover crop. I have some slides here, but Angie Peltier is actually going to talk to you guys about this trial in depth this afternoon. So hopefully you're sticking around after lunch, because she's going to give you the full rundown on the results that we saw for this trial this afternoon. So I'll probably wrap it up a little bit early here. So in next year, we're going to be repeating all of the trials that we talked about here, minus that P&K trial. So we'll be looking at foliar copper applications on those kind of lighter, low copper testing soils, continuing our polyhalite compared to AMS trial, nitrogen rates on multiple different varieties with that application and yield map based trial. We have 3 sites in the ground this year that were wheat this year and planted to rye this fall. That'll be getting soybeans green seeded into that rye next spring. So we're continuing on that trial. We were also just able to start one volunteer wheat as a cover crop trial. So compare the grower comparing his regular volunteer wheat control practices, comparing it to just letting the volunteer wheat grow and what the benefit is there. And the thought with that one actually has more of a national implication related to Farm Bill. There's a lot of talk about green practices, cover crop practices, how they're going to be implemented or mandated potentially in the Farm Bill. And so what's that going to mean for us? And if volunteer wheat basically is a cover crop that you don't even have to plant, it's just already there. Can we count volunteer wheat as a cover crop? And if we do have any legislation that is requiring cover crops, can volunteer wheat help you check off that box? Is there a benefit to having the wheat come up naturally as opposed to basically killing that wheat down to plant a rye cover crop that might not emerge later on if it doesn't get rain? So that's another question we like to answer with that trial. Next year, I'm probably running out of time here. We will also be getting into biologicals. So biologicals have been a hot topic. I've been talking with the Pivot Bio rep, and they would like to do some on-farm trials. And so we're just I'm waiting to hear back from them to see if we can start working together to try some Pivot Bio on wheat with their wheat products. And doing some other biological stuff too, but I will wrap it up there and see if we have time for a question or two. And I will be around until lunch if you guys have anything you just want to come up and talk one-on-one. Or if you want to do a trial, we are always looking for trial sites. If you guys want to test anything out, we try to make it as easy as possible, as streamlined as possible, to stay out of your guys' way as much as we can to get this data for you.
All right, no further questions for Missy? Thank you, Missy. All right, we are going to pause our live feed now, so we will come back to our live feed after our break. But in between. If you haven't signed in at the registration table, make sure to do so and grab the handouts that you need for the day. I also wanted to talk about, Missy just talked about a nitrogen information. We are having an upcoming event here in Ada. The Nitrogen Smart program, a deep dive, is going to be happening here at the Event Center on February 16th at 9 a.m. in the morning with Dan Kaiser and Brad Carlson. So if anybody wants further information on that,
Please make sure you're joining us for part two. Part two